an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering King of Scars, chapters 26 through 30. Isaac, Nikolai, Nina, Isaac, Nikolai. In these chapters, Isaac is starting to get some fifis for a princess. And I really want that to work out for him, but I also kind of wonder if it could possibly work out for him. And Nikolai, it turns out, has been tricked hardcore. I hate this. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. Thank you very much to Joanna for commissioning this episode. What's up, Joanna? So, I want to start off the top talking about Nikolai's situation because I just have to. I am always very into plot lines where superior beings tell somebody to do a thing, and it turns out those superior beings are either A, full of shit because they're clueless and they don't actually know how things work the way they thought, or B, full of shit because they are actively lying. And mild spoilers for American Gods, that was a major thing in that series. And it was kind of a bummer because I started to create basically a skeleton of a book that I wanted to write, and it hinged very much on gods lying to people. And then when I read that, I was like, well, guess that's been done by somebody incredibly famous, so I'm not going to bother with that. But this is much more interesting to me because these people, while they do have this huge amount of power, and so it could be forgiven if people called them gods, they are trapped. So they are not completely at liberty. And that, what it turns out they believe is that the Darkling, and I say they, and I am not entirely certain of this. I'm not sure if I'm supposed to know that the others are in on this as well, or if it's supposed to be kind of up in the air as of right now. Definitely Elisabetta is she is fully 100% behind the deception. Are the others also behind it? Or is she I don't see how she could pull off a con like this and also fool them as well. So I have to assume they're all in on it. And I feel so bad for Nikolai because he has just never been in a position where people are 100% on his side in a way that he can trust. And it must get so tiring. And this in particular is just the kind of betrayal. It's so personal. It's one thing if somebody decides that they are betraying you as a king because they want somebody else in power, which on the outside, that's what this just looks like, right? Is well, the Darkling will be better for Ravka than you. But because this is also about a power that has been inhabiting his body, Elisabetta says something it would have been easier if you hadn't been able to push it out of you. And I am assuming what she was intending was for the shadow to kill Nikolai. And I'm going to keep calling it the shadow. I don't have another good name for it. And then it would just depart and inhabit the Darkling's body. I don't really understand what she meant by that. And I don't understand how the Darkling's body is still around. And I'm assuming that we will get that information later, because it's not like this author is shying away from how big a, plot hole is the wrong word, but that is a particular feature that we're going to need to address. I mean, we were there in the text and saw him burned. More than one person saw. And if I can recall, they had tailored somebody to look like Alina. Could it be that his body was somebody who had just been tailored to look like him? And who would have done that? Could it, like, these gods were already sort of imprisoned, weren't they? So they couldn't, I don't know how that would have worked. I'm very curious about that. I mean, and I think I said something even when this was all happening about how I was hoping that was really his body, because if it wasn't Alina's body, then maybe it didn't have to be his body. But I was like hoping that we were done with that storyline, not necessarily because I find the Darkling boring so much as Alina's storyline was boring to me. So I kind of felt like if we were reviving him, then we would have to revive what was going on with her. It's looking like that's totally not true, because Alina doesn't have her power anymore. And there's no way to get her like roped back into all of this unless we were to find somebody who was inhabited by her power and get it transferred back into her body. And I kind of feel like that's not going to be how this is handled. Because like she did transfer some of her power into people's bodies. That did happen. So I don't know what to make of this, you guys. All right, I'm going to back up and we're going to start talking about Isaac. So he is like going to the Gilded Bog with a man named Hiram. What's his last name? I'm trying to find it. Schenk. Hiram Schenk. Great name. And this is supposed to be the disastrous, exposition, basically, of these underwater craft that he has been working on. And like, as readers, we know that this is not supposed to go to plan. He evidently was not let in on this secret. So when shit goes wildly left, he is not ready for it. And it turns out they didn't totally think he could handle faking the kind of shock he would have had to fake, convincingly. I get where they're coming from in theory, but I don't agree with them simply because you can tell somebody, oh, it's going to malfunction. And that doesn't mean that they're going to expect missiles to be flying in various directions to the point where they knock a mast down and almost kill somebody. I am confident that still could have caught him off guard. But him being in on it, at least he wouldn't have had a fucking heart attack. I do appreciate how apologetic everybody is to him after that they couldn't tell him. Genya is like actually on her knees in front of him, like, hey, forgive us, please. And the chapter ends with him saying, I was just really excited because something had gone wrong that finally wasn't my fault. And I was like, that is a pretty good bit, actually. And the whole way that this chapter, like, it starts off with nothing could have prepared him for how poorly things went with Hiram Schenk, or maybe the disaster, something like that. So I really expected something to go actually wrong. And it turns out like, oh, it went wrong, but it was all part of the plan. It turns out, though, the Fjerdans are not convinced. They know the game that's being played here. They are insulted at the fact that they are like considered to be so gullible that they wouldn't realize. And this section with Isaac ends with him finding out that the Fjerdans have declared war. And there is like another distant Lantsov that they're pushing. We'll get there eventually. But I truly didn't expect the Fjerdans to march so quickly. And honestly, I guess because we had kind of come to a place of peace with Matthias from the other series, I sort of wondered if the Fjerdans were going to, as a country, begin to turn the corner. And that is not how things are happening. They are remaining pieces of shit. And he was like the one bright spot in it all. You know, I mean, I know what's going on with Nina, but I was hoping that that was the experiment of one particularly sadistic dude who has remained and is on the DL continuing some shit that maybe isn't sanctioned governmentally anymore. Nah. I was too hopeful. This is the thing. When you want to think the best of people, you give them so much room because you just don't want to believe that people can be that terrible. So while it seems like you're being generous with them, you're actually being generous with your own self-delusion. It's tragic. Like, truly. So, all right. I'm going to jump ahead to Nikolai and the first chapter of the 2, where he is just hanging out with Zoya. And this chapter begins, interestingly, in my opinion, with him thinking about how Elizaveta had wanted to delay for a few more days so he could solidify his control. But Nikolai was unwilling to risk it. He needed to get back to the capital, but it was more than that. He could sense the monster getting stronger with every day, and he suspected that it had become easier to make his demon rise because it wanted to stretch its wings. So I am assuming that what she's telling him about needing to gain more control is just garbage. And what she actually is hoping, because she says as much later on that it would have been easier if the thing had just overpowered him, I think she's just hoping it's going to get strong enough to just take him out. And she's framing it as, oh, it'll help you, but not really. So there's this interesting moment here. First of all, he fucking hates it here. He can't sleep. There's no eating. There's no drinking. There's no cold. There's no hot. He's just so sick of it. And he is watching Zoya. And he's really fascinated. Not only by the fact that she's clearly like learning some shit outside of her usual purview, but also she is relaxed in a way that he has literally never seen her before. And that I found really striking. At court, Zoya always moved with grace, her steps smooth, her gaze sharp and unforgiving as the blade of a knife. But he realized now it was the grace of an actress on the stage. She was always performing, always on guard, even with him. This just really hit for me. And it's the kind of thing that I think back on because I was very much like this towards the end of high school and in college, extremely aware of myself and always either posing outright or holding myself with a certain posture on purpose because I knew the effect it gave. And it was something that I had a lot of people like comment on to me about the way I carried myself being sort of intimidating to them. I had a lot of people say that because I was just occupying my space, you know, and it took a ton of energy, you guys. It is so tiring to live like that. And there are times now that I in a way wish I could get back the desire to do that, because I feel like it helps a little bit with the sort of fake it till you make it mentality of, if you hold yourself a certain way, eventually you'll begin to feel a certain way. And I do believe that to be partially true. And since I have been having issues the past few years with self-image and just not feeling good in my body, I was like, I want to bring back some of that awareness and changes to my posture and overall, like, feeling in my body. And I just don't really have it in me anymore. You know, it's a similar thing as to why I can go an entire vacation amongst people that I have never met in person and not wear a stitch of makeup almost the entire time. Whereas the me of 20 years ago almost now would have not been caught anywhere without at least mascara and eyeliner at the least. And in some ways that's growth, and it's great. And in other ways, I do sort of miss the power that came with that. It's a very distinct thing. And the fact that Zoya is always on her guard like that makes total sense as somebody not only in her position, but somebody who looks the way that she does. Her extraordinary beauty, whether or not she considers it to be sort of a curse, you have to learn to use it. It is a tool. It's power. And managing to hold yourself in a certain way and never let that curtain go up, drop. Either way. I mean, that just completely makes sense to me. And this was also like a major factor in me finally deciding that I wasn't into a life of theater and stage performance, because you weren't just on stage performing a role. You had to sort of, especially as a woman, you had to be like this as well. You had to be consciously, like in a character, even when you weren't on stage, because you had to make yourself seem like you would be available to play other parts, that you would be agreeable to work with, that you would be charming. Personal likability is like a major factor in getting cast in things, because we don't like to talk about this, but like nepotism is a major thing. And if you manage to make yourself friendly and maybe kiss some ass, you will get work. And I couldn't fucking be bothered. I didn't really like the people I was working with enough to try, and I realized I just didn't want to constantly pretend. It's one thing to pretend only on stage, but I was going to have to pretend for like 80% of my life. And that's also part of what drew me to continuing to podcast like I do. I can be so genuine with this show because it's mine. And there were some times when I was like first beginning to really make this into a business where I considered joining up with different like podcast networks that were out there. And I would think about how they ultimately would probably have final say on whether or not I was allowed to say some things or, you know, handle my show in a certain way. And the thought of having to like once again go back to pretending or censoring myself, I couldn't bear the thought of that. It's just, you know, I still have to do it in places in my life like anybody. I have to censor myself wildly when I'm like with Owen's family, but it's just not something that I think I would have the energy for every day. And I know that like, that's how most people operate, is they have to do that every day. If you're in the service industry or if you're in like an office politics sort of workplace, it's unavoidable. Anything where you work with other people, you have to a point, you know? And that's the one thing that I'm constantly grateful for with this job, beyond just the fact that I get to read and watch TV, which is amazing. I love that I am able to be 100% myself, and I don't have to put a show on anymore like that. I put this show on, And it's like exactly me. And that's all I need to be. It's great. And I felt so bad because he points out to Zoya that he is like jealous of this dragon that's been teaching her because he made her look relaxed. And she immediately straightens up, and it says her armor locks back into place, which is such a great way to say this, and how much he regrets that this is how she reacted. And same, you know, I want Zoya to not constantly feel like she has to be doing this, even around him. However, she's clearly growing to have feelings for him. So she's putting on her armor to protect herself in a way that she hasn't. I don't think that's been the thing that she's been as concerned about. I think she's had her armor on because she needs to get a job done, and it's the most efficient way to do it. And yes, she's protecting herself, but it's always been secondary. And this time it feels different. You know, she is developing feelings for somebody who, as far as they are both concerned, is out of her reach. And that's not something that you want to allow yourself to get used to. If you know it's 100% not a possibility, I mean, why would you? You know, I don't blame her at all. And I just, this scene really was a great precursor to his scene later where he's actually trying to access the being, and there's that inner struggle, because having the two of them just get to talk and be together emphasizes the relationship between the two of them and the way it's developing. So he hands her this paper and tells her, this is a royal order declaring you Ravka's protector and making you commander both of the first and second armies. I'm trying to do the responsible thing. And this, for her, she is acting as if he's being foolish in his choice, but I fully believe that's a cover for her being flipped out, that he's essentially admitting he's not sure he's going to survive the day. And she just doesn't want to face the fact that he is walking into this knowing he may not walk out again. And she even says later, like, why is it so easy for you to talk about your own death? And he's just like, I don't see the point in pretending a thing isn't possible and like letting it sneak up behind me. I may as well face it, which is just also how I operate. And it's interesting to me how I think Zoya would also operate this way. It's just that the fact that she cares about him makes her resent this in him. And if it weren't him doing this, I think that she would respect it. But because she cares about him and doesn't want him to die, she's reacting poorly. And I appreciate that, you know. It's her letting her emotions show a little bit more than she usually does. And he's like, don't tell me you'd miss me. Zoya looked away again. I suppose the world would be less interesting without you in it. I wouldn't let myself be drowned in amber for just anyone you know. I'm touched, he said. And he was. It was the closest thing to a compliment she'd ever given him. So at this point, he asks her about her amplifier. And she wants to know why it matters. And he's like, maybe it doesn't. And I thought that was a great answer. You know, like, I think if he pushed it and was like, because I want to get to know you, that would have caused her to like clam up a little bit more, because she's, again, still trying to protect herself from getting too attached to him. But if he makes it seem casual and just like, well, you know, I'm just, who knows, that like makes the danger feel like it's less imminent. And it turns out that this story is so like awful. So she was with the Darkling and his people. They were all searching for these like white tigers that had been rumored to be around. one of which was rumored to be an amplifier. And they corner a female, but they don't catch her. But she had 3 cubs, and she got separated from them. And the Darklings people took her cubs and were basically going to kill and like butcher them and hand the pieces out to various people. And she was so disgusted by this. The mother was like walking around the outside of the camp, yowling. The kittens were upset, the cubs. She finally decided to let them free, even though she knows they're going to know she did it and it's going to be a nightmare. But she just can't stand for this. So she gets them out of their cage and almost like to the woods, but they're very little and they can't really like run in any, not the way a fully grown animal can just head for the trees. They're not capable of that. And she says that a male turned up and headed straight for the kittens, and she doesn't know why. And what's interesting is like later on, she says that the Darkling assured her her scent was all over those cubs and the mother would not have raised them. She would have, abandoned them. And she, Zoya, of course, does not want to believe that. I don't know if it's supposed to be that the male went for the cubs because her scent was on them already, or if it was supposed to be like males can go after cubs because they're not their own offspring, and they will kill and eat their mate's litter from another male. And it's really awful. Like, truly, it just reasons to just be angry and hateful toward men. So I kind of was like, it felt like that a little bit, but it was just weird because the cubs weren't with the mother in the first place. Like, I didn't know what kind of, it doesn't really matter. In any case, she throws her body between herself and the male tiger. He slices down her back with his claws, and she sees her blood in the snow and turns and uses her powers to just shove him into, I think, the face of a cliff or something. But regardless, the male dies. And because she's the one who killed him, it is her amplifier. There's nothing anybody can do about it at this point. And the Darkling is really irritated because this was supposed to be a big ceremonial thing that he got to choose who to bestow it on and yada, yada, yada. And she says, oh, he struck a tree when I threw him. It snapped his neck. And she says, when it was all over, the Darkling had me brought to his tent and said, so, Zoya, you freed the tiger cubs. You did the selfless thing. And yet somehow you are the one who has finished the day with greater power. More than any of your betters who have patiently waited their turn. What do you say to that? And she tells him that she's sorry. And he says, is that really what you wish to say? So I told him the truth. I put my chin up and said, they can all hang. It was my blood in the snow. That pleased him. He told me it was a job well done. And then he said, beware of power, Zoya. There is no amount of it that can make them love you. And I thought that was interesting, and I was really glad Nikolai immediately responds with, was it love you wanted? And I was like, yeah. I mean, she says something like, the Darkling saw me clearly even then. And I was like, did he? Because that doesn't sound like a warning that you needed. I don't feel like Zoya wanted anybody's love. She wanted to not need anybody. I feel like that was some projection on his part. That's all I'm saying. And this is when she says, he told me because they had my scent, their mother wouldn't raise them, that she'd left them to die in the snow. But I don't believe that. Do you? Her face was composed, but her eyes were imploring. Nikolai felt as if he were looking at the young girl she'd been on that cold and bloody night. No, he said. I don't believe that at all. Good, she said. Good. And she tells him that every lover she's had, she tells them a lie about where she got the scars. And when he says, well, why did you tell me the truth? She's like, you offered me like a kingdom and, risked your life. The more I know of you, he said, the more I am sure you are exactly what Ravka needs. In that moment, he wished things might have been different, that he might not die tomorrow, that he could be led by his heart instead of duty. Because Zoya was not kind, and she was not easy, but she was already a queen. And yo, is that not the best line? It's been highlighted like 1,500 times, and that makes complete sense to me. I've been saying, I just really do think they're gonna somehow figure out a way to wind up being together. And you know what I keep thinking? It's like Nikolai is going to abdicate the throne. Isaac will stay. He'll marry the princess that he has fallen in love with. And Nikolai can marry Zoya because he's just Isaac now. That would be, if it were a very different story, that's how it would go. This author is 100% not going to do anything like that. So, do we just not get a happy ending? I mean, I'm not going to be like angry if we don't, but I would kind of like one. I mean, so few of our people get happy endings in these books. So then we go to Nina, and she is at, is it Carl Broom or Jarl Broom? I can't remember. But she is at his house with Hannah, and it's really difficult for her to sit by and watch Hannah just have to say yes to everything he says, accept all of his criticisms, accept all of his suggestions for her future. And when she says something about like, wouldn't my husband want a wife that he could discuss politics and stuff with? Broom sighed. A man who spends all day handling the country's business does not want to converse about such things with his wife. He wishes to be soothed, entertained, reminded of the gentler things in this world, the things we fight so hard to protect. Nina stifled a gag. She wasn't sure she was going to be able to keep her excellent dinner down. Yeah, this is one of those things that like so many dudes still have this POV, and it's wild to me that they really think their shit is like so hard going out into the world that they deserve to be coddled like that. Women deal with so much more garbage, and we're still expected to carry even more shit. Why is it our responsibility? Hate it. So, she checks the pockets of this coat he left in the sitting room. She found a letter full of talk of the little Lantsov and someone named Vadik Demidov, which I believe is the person that they are declaring for later, but I don't remember. She did her best to commit the rest of the information to memory, but she couldn't afford to be gone from the table long. She snuffed the candle and slipped out of the sitting room. Jarl Broom was standing in the dimly lit hall. And I was really freaked out here, guys. I genuinely was like, has he started to figure it out? I don't think so, but he convinced her that he didn't know who she was before. And he totally did. So I am really like worried, I think that he doesn't. Because if he knew who she was, there's no reason not to make it obvious at this point. She is kind of in his clutches. I feel like if he wanted to imprison her, they're in his home. There's not really going to be a better opportunity for him to do that. So I think he doesn't know who she is, but I just can't be confident of that, And she says something like, she convinces him that there was a good reason. And then it says, I meant no offense. I'm afraid my country manners have displeased you. Brum placed his finger beneath her chin, but he was gentle this time, as he bid her stand and tilted her face upward. Not at all. I find them refreshing. You'll learn to navigate the company of your betters in time. Nina lowered her eyes. If I am lucky enough to have cause to. And he says something about how he's looking forward to seeing how Hannah's lessons progress. I do not have a permanent position here, Nina said, wringing her hands. I'm not sure how long the well-mother will tolerate my presence. Brum placed his hands over hers, and she stilled. Such a nervous little thing. The well-mother will always have a place for you, if I say so. Nina looked up at him with every bit of awe she could muster. She clasped his hands tightly. Thank you, sir, she said fervently. Thank you. Whew. Talk about energy. So after he leaves, Hannah says, did you get what you needed? Nina held up the blob of warm candle wax she'd pressed against Brum's signet ring to form a perfect impression of his seal. Is that when she clasped his hands tightly? Was that what she had done? And she was wringing her hands because she was like, she had the wax in her hands? I didn't put that together until just a second, but I think that's what was meant to be going on. And she like presses it into his ring. Ah, that's pretty clever. Okay. So we have Hannah having to be tailored in order to look like a Fjerdan soldier. And she has to tailor herself, and she is not like comfortable with doing this. And it doesn't help, like Nina says something about how we'll start with your chin before we do your nose because I don't want you to accidentally seal off a breathing passage. And the girl like stops dead, and Nina's like, I'm kidding. And then Nina thinks to herself, well, like, I'm not kidding, but like, it's probably going to be fine. That didn't occur to me, and that is so scary. So eventually Hannah has done almost her entire face, and she has to get Nina to cut her hair off. And Nina does not want to do it. She loves Hannah's hair. And there's a moment earlier where she's like looking at Hannah and thinking how she wants to run her fingers through her curls. And I was just like, yo, she wants Hannah. Like, come on, just hook up, guys. Just go ahead. And I love Hannah for this. When Nina's like, are you sure? Hannah says, I'm not going to jeopardize this whole plan for the sake of my vanity. Do it. That is commitment. You know, I like to think that were everything on the line in this fashion, I would also be willing to do that. But knowing that Hannah is meant to like be in society, and they say eventually that they'll shave her head and she'll say that it was like penance. And maybe that will help. But her father seems somebody who is much more concerned with society than with religion. And I think he'll be pretty pissed. And so, yeah, she's going to have to deal with the fallout from that. And Hannah is looking in the mirror after this is done. And there are tears in her eyes. If I had just been a boy. If I had been the son my father wanted. Nina gripped Hannah's shoulders. You are perfect, Hannah. That your father can't value your strength speaks only to his weakness. Hannah looked back at the mirror, blinking her tears away. The lips are still too full. Leave the lips, said Nina sharply, then rose to hide her blush. They're just right. This is something that I always wonder, for those of you who have read Little Women, a lot of Jo's character in Little Women is based on the attitudes and opinions of Louisa May Alcott. And there are so many letters of hers where she talks about wishing that she were a boy and that she's never fell in love with a boy, but she's fallen in love with many pretty girls. And I've always wondered, was it simply that she was gay, or was she trans? You know, was her desire to be a boy born simply of the complete injustice meted out on women and the lack of options? Like, one would be forgiven for wishing you were a guy just because being a woman, you're not fucking allowed to do anything. But was it that simple? Or was she genuinely like, I am in the wrong body. This is not right. And here, I feel like that's what it is for Hannah. It's just, she wants the freedoms that come with being a boy, but I don't get the feeling that she genuinely wants to be a boy, or like believes herself to be a boy. I could be wrong about that. And she has not got the vocabulary for that yet. Maybe like as she continues to walk around in this more masculinized body, she'll be like, this feels more like me than I have ever felt like. And she'll want to remain, you know? But it's just a really fascinating thing to think about, a universe that you can change your appearance so much. And what a godsend that would be to so many people who are trans and just desperately want to pass and not have to deal with the bullshit. Being able to just like get your face tailored. I mean, yeah, it's just plastic surgery, but like way faster and less painful. And I can imagine there being a lot of jealousy of Hannah reading this section, you know? And I'm just curious where that's going to go, you know? Especially considering that, like, Nina was already attracted to her as a woman. So will that be any different now that she looks different? Or, you know, I'm just curious how the author's going to handle that. So that is the end of that section. Then we go back to Isaac. And he has this meeting with the trade minister and all these people on financial shit. He basically tells his guy to like take the lead, and that dude is very honored and like pretty much elated actually that he's given that responsibility. But then he gets cornered by Hiram Schenk. Do you think you can continue to play games with us? Genya had told him that if he got caught unawares in any situation, his best approach was to say, I beg your pardon, with as much haughty grandeur as possible. And so he says that, and then didn't I recently drag your sodden daughter from a pond? Schenk was not deterred. Did you really think we would be fooled by that bit of theater last night? You were close to completing the submersibles and the missile system when we received our information months ago, and we all know that you do not rest until your inventions are perfected. You cannot continue to flirt like a debutante at a ball. We will have our prototype, or you will be treated like the pauper state you are. And Isaac does not know what to say to this. He thinks Nikolai would have never stood for this insult and would have said something that would make this guy shit himself. But he doesn't know what to say, so he just says, I beg your pardon again, and steps past him. And he comes across the others talking about the situation, because as far as they had been concerned, the faking of the disaster was totally convincing. They really thought they nailed it. So the fact that this little charade was not bought by the Feridans is a bummer. They are not happy about it. And they are continuing to be like, okay, no, but seriously, where the fuck is the king though? There is no sign. 3 weeks, and it's like they just vanished off the face of the earth. And there's this great moment where they're talking about the apparat and like wanting to ask him if he knows anything, but they don't want him near Isaac because he'll be able to like tell. They think that he'll figure it out. And David says, perhaps we should have him killed. Genya had burst into fresh tears. When you say that, it just makes me miss Zoya more. I love that so much. Genya and David are just such a great pairing. I love the two of them. I really love it. So then we have him meeting up with Eri, the princess, and taking her on a tour of the house. And the point of this is that there is somebody on the shoe guards that is like wanting to defect, and they think they know who it is, but they need to find a way to talk to the person one-on-one. And the shoe guards are almost never alone. So they create this scenario where they're going to be, they're going to spar with one another, and there will be him versus the princess, and Tamar versus Mayu, who is the one who was, they think, trying to defect. And that way, if there's two fights going on at once, the one of the two of them are going to be able to have a little bit of a chat. And likely, most eyes are going to be on the Lantsov King and the princess and not these other two. So just, he's meant to be a distraction. And I love this so much. She kind of is resistant to the Princess Eri. She is resistant to fighting him. But eventually, she is convinced, and it's clear like she wants to. And she tries to be like, well, I'm not very good, la la la. She had radically understated her talents. She was a gifted swordswoman and moved without a hint of hesitation. Distantly, he heard the grunts of the other fighters and dared a glance at them. And she gets him in the gut at this point. And he's joking around, and it says she seemed more relaxed than he had ever seen her. You have a different fighting style than I expected, she said. I might say the same of you. Mayu is doubled over and gasping for breath, and it's treated like a kind of Tamar took it too far, and they have to make restitution. So he offers to have like a private dinner. Tamar shook her head. That would be seen as a sign of favoritism among the other hopefuls. Eri looked uneasy. We don't want to cause problems for the king. Surely the others wouldn't need to know, said Isaac before he thought better of it. Tamar's frown deepened, but she said, Of course, Your Highness. So, she looks like she's not pleased, but once they leave, she's like, oh, good for you. This is awesome. We'll definitely be able to press for more information. And then she sees his face and she's like, fuck, you just like her. Oh, this sucks. And the thing here that I'm not sure what to think of is Mayu took like this injury apparently that needed restitution, but I can't tell if it was like her sort of overplaying it because she wants them to need to pay restitution. She's trying to give them an opening because she is trying to defect. Or if Mayu is just not a very good fighter. And this is mentioned later, like, he is thinking about her abilities and the fact that she just didn't really seem like she had the kind of training one would expect. And I started to wonder, is it possible that she and the princess are actually one another the way that he is with Nikolai? Because it feels like the princess has the kind of training that a guard would have. And I mean, her guards would know what she looks like. So has she maybe been tailored as well? Like, I'm just very curious what the deal is with an apparent guard who is out here with like the royals, not seeming like they're trained up to the standard one would expect. I feel like there's got to be something else going on there. I don't know. So this is when he finds out the Fjerdans are marching. It could be a week or a month, but war is coming. They're marching under the Lantsov banner. Their rulers have declared for Vadik Demidov. They say he is a Lantsov cousin and the rightful heir to Ravka's throne. His claim is supported by a man named Magnus Opskjær, a Fjerden shipping magnate. He was once an emissary to Ravka, and Opskjær says he had an affair with the Ravkan queen and claims he is Nikolai's true father. So, throwing it into, further chaos with Nikolai being a bastard with an actual father who is going to say that's who he is, and this other guy who is a full-blooded Lantsov versus a bastard son. And the guy apparently has love letters and stuff that could potentially solidify his position. And even if those letters aren't really legit, it's still going to cause a fucking problem. The Fjerdens aren't going to back down because the letters aren't real good, this sucks. And at this point, they're all talking about how to handle this war and the ways they're going to fund it and who they're going to call on for help. And Isaac has to be like, dude, guys, if this is going to happen, I can't keep pretending to be Nikolai and lead the country through a war. You have to see that. We're going to have to stop this. And all of them are unwilling to really admit that to one another, but it's clear he's right. And essentially they're we just need to get to the end of the week and then we're going to evaluate and see where we are. So then we have this meal that he has scheduled with Ari, and it's actually really romantic and sweet, the two of them together. They get along so well, and he slips up here and there, but it seems like it's just played down enough that she doesn't suspect anything, and he's trying to be as genuine with her as he can. And she asks at one point, do you ever feel like a fraud? Yes, I do. All the time. If people didn't bow to me, if they didn't dress me in silks and kiss my hem, would I still be a princess, or would I just be a girl with a fancy colander on her head? Isaac laughed. It's a good question. All I know is I don't feel like a king. What do you feel? Tired, he said honestly. Ready for a cabbage roll. And when he asks her how she would rule, she's real cagey, because that's basically what would you do if your sister was dead? Can't be doing that. But finally she says, they're not the musings of a queen. The things I hope for are an artless girl. She's basically I'm going to admit I'm naive. I just want to end war, let people have some freedom and equality. And she's I know that sounds stupid. And he's it doesn't sound stupid. I mean, if we don't have some ideals, what are we going to do? Will you return home immediately after the ball at the end of the week? He asked. Yes. He didn't think he imagined the regret in her eyes. Meet me in the conservatory during the ball, he said before he could stop himself. Otherwise, we'll never have a real moment alone. He was shocked to hear the words leave his mouth. He was even more shocked when she said yes. And then we go to the final chapter. Nikolai. So, he calls forth this creature. And it should be mentioned that at the start of this, Yuri says, I find I do not know what to pray for. Nikolai gave his shoulder an encouraging squeeze. Then pray for Ravka. The monk nodded. You are a good man. I can have faith in the Starless One, and have faith in that, too. That, not you. I didn't notice that at the time, but turns out that's pretty significant. So, Zoya makes it very clear she's extremely worried and desperately wants him to come back, and she's freaked out. And they then have to proceed. And he gets surrounded by these vines that the thornwood stalks that come out of the ground, and is seeing Zoya get hemmed in by this sphere of amber. And he calls forth the creature, cuts off one of the giant thorns, and holds it in his hand. And then there's the back and forth within himself. Only one of us will survive this, Nikolai vowed. It is time you met the will of a king. What king? Said a dark voice within him. It is a bastard I have come to kill. Nikolai, nothing. Liar. Fraud. Heir to no one. Pretender to the throne. I see who you are. And the people don't love you, bastard. Despite your constant striving. How long have you been begging for their love? Little Nikolai Lantsov, playing the clown for his mother, the sycophant for his father, the handsome courtier for Alina. She was an orphan, a peasant, and even she didn't want you. And yet you continue pleading for scraps like the commoner you are. And he is trying so hard to not believe this voice. But the thing is with voices like this is that they come from your shit. So they know what to say. And even if you try and resist them, they will anticipate your argument. That is not to say that you can't continue to fight and eventually win. But it's not like you're going to outwit your own voice, you know? And he tries to say, you're alone. And Nikolai's like, no, I'm not. Go ahead and do it then. Drive the thorn into your chest. Do you really think it'll matter? Do you really think anything can make you the man you were before? How do you think I was able to take hold of your heart and burrow so deeply? You gave me fertile soil, and so I took root. You will never be what you were. The rot has spread too far. And essentially continues on with, you can pretend to be better than you are, but we're going to know you're full of shit. Why are you desperate to cover up this darkness in you? Because you know nobody would want to look at you. And they would know how weak you are. And eventually, Nikolai comes back to himself and drives the thorn into his chest. And I was surprised that he was able to do it, because I sort of wondered, this author can be unpredictable, which is great. I love that. And I was like, maybe she's going to have him fucking fail. Like, I don't have any guarantees Nikolai is going to survive this. I think he will, because there's another book, and I'm assuming that's about him. But, like, I didn't genuinely know that. So he drives it through his chest. And I love this moment, too, right beforehand. Nikolai, nothing. Ravka will never be yours. Perhaps not. But if you loved a thing, the work was never done. I love that line. I think that's something that a lot of us could stand to remember. Especially like when you're in relationships, you can take people for granted and feel like it's done. I have them. And we should not have that attitude. So he drives it into his chest, and the shadow is in front of him. And he is supposed to fight it and kill it. But he starts to get crucified, essentially. It's like driving through his hands and his feet. And Elizaveta is saying, I had hoped you might simply let the monster overtake you. It would have made all of this easier. And they bring in the Darkling's body. "Forgive me," Yuri said, his face contrite. "I wish it did not have to be so. I wish you could both survive this day, but the Starless One is Ravka's greatest hope. He must return." And Yuri approaches the shadow beast. It says, reached for the glowing shard wedged within its heart. Nikolai knew with sudden surety that if he pulled the thorn from the monster's chest first, it would be an end to everything. And he tells Yuri no. And Nikolai is stuck, like he is pinned in place in the most literal way possible. And then he starts thinking about what the voice said. Why do you hide the demon? Because it was angry, hungry, full of broken animal longing. And though Nikolai might not like it, those things were all a part of him still. He had fought the demon. Now he would feed it. Nikolai shut his eyes and did what that dark voice had told him to do. He let go of the perfect prince, the good king. He reached for all the wounded, shameful things he'd been so sure he had to hide. In this moment, he was not kind or merciful or just. He was a monster. He left his mortal body behind. When Nikolai opened his eyes, he was looking at Yuri from a different angle, close enough to see the smudge on his glasses, the wiry hairs of his scrabbly beard. Nikolai felt his wings beat the air, felt his demon heart race. He released a snarl and launched himself at the monk. And that is the end of the chapter. I am delighted. I did not see this coming. And genuinely don't know how this is going to go. And I mean, I am assuming Nikolai's going to win. But what does that even look like? They're in this like alternate reality that they can't escape from. At least I don't think they can. I don't, like what would that even be? And they're going to fight against actual saints that have all this power. And let's see. Elizaveta says, the boundaries of the fold will remain intact, and here my brethren will be held captive still. But I will be free because I am bound to him. So I was thinking that they did know. But for the way she's talking, maybe not. Or maybe they knew that only one of them could be free and they made a deal. I don't know. But yeah, like what does him winning even look like? And I'm assuming like Yuri would have to die. I feel a little bad, as much as Yuri's like completely misguided. I don't dislike him. He's just annoying, And I don't know. He's been misled by fucking saints. Like anybody who has the belief system he does is going to listen to them. That's not really his fault. He's being taken advantage of. I don't know. So let's see. The next episode is January 21st. Almost a month away. I am dying. But yeah, that's when it is. So sorry guys, it'll be a little bit of a wait, but not too terribly long. So I'm excited to find out what happens next. All right, everybody. I'm going to wrap. Thank you again, Joanna. And until next time, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.